night my son-in-law had my daughter arrested at her own baby shower, I was standing 20 feet away holding a plate of lemon cake I'd baked myself. I remember the weight of that plate in my hands. I remember the sound of her crying, and I remember the look on his face, not guilt, not embarrassment, but something closer to satisfaction, like he'd been waiting a long time to do that. My name doesn't matter much to this story. What matters is that I'm 63 years old. I spent 31 years as a union electrician in Cincinnati, and I raised my daughter alone after her mother passed. Breast cancer. 2009. My daughter was 14 years old when we buried her mother, and from that day forward, it was just the two of us in that house on Claremont Avenue, her doing her homework at the kitchen table while I heated up soup, me driving her to swim practice at 5:30 in the morning, because she had a gift, and I was not going to let that gift go to waste. She got a partial scholarship to Ohio State. I covered the rest, working overtime and taking weekend jobs rewiring old farmhouses out in Claremont County. I didn't mind. She was worth every hour. She met him her junior year. He was finishing his MBA. His father owned a chain of regional medical supply companies, the kind of business that sounds boring until you look at the numbers, and then you realize there's more money in hospital beds and IV stands than most people will ever see. His name was Beau Whitfield. Tall, good-looking in a way that always seemed slightly rehearsed. The kind of man who knew exactly how to shake your hand and look you in the eye and make you feel like you mattered, right up until you didn't. I want to be fair. In the beginning, he seemed all right. He took her to nice restaurants. He remembered her birthday. He flew her to Charleston for a long weekend and sent me a text, asking if it was okay. I thought that showed respect. I thought I was reading him right. I was not reading him right. They got engaged when she was 26. His family hosted the engagement party at their house out in Indian Hill, the wealthy eastern suburb where Cincinnati keeps its old money. It was a beautiful house, the kind of place where the landscaping alone costs more than my truck. His father, a man named Royce Whitfield, greeted me at the door with the kind of warmth that has a ceiling on it. You could feel the ceiling. He was perfectly polite, and I was perfectly aware that in his mind, I was the electrician whose daughter had gotten lucky. I smiled and ate their food and watched my daughter laugh and thought, she's happy, that's what matters. That's the whole job. The wedding was the following spring, 400 guests. His side, mostly. My side was my brother Lloyd, my daughter's two friends from college, and my neighbor Faye, who cried through the entire ceremony and kept squeezing my arm. I cried too. I'm not too proud to admit that. Standing there watching her walk down that aisle, I thought about her mother. I thought about every 5:30 morning and every overtime weekend and every bowl of soup at that kitchen table. I thought, we made it. She made it. I had no idea what I was leaving her inside of. The first year of the marriage, things seemed fine on the surface. They bought a house in Hyde Park. He was working at his father's company, moving into a senior VP role. She was doing marketing consulting, building her own client list. She called me on Sundays. She seemed okay. Maybe a little tired sometimes. A little careful about what she said when she talked about Beau. But I told myself that was just marriage. The adjustment period. The learning to share space with another person. Then she told me she was pregnant. I drove over to their house the evening she called, and I brought a bottle of sparkling cider because I don't drink much, and neither does she, and I sat at their kitchen island, and we toasted, and I held myself together until I got back to my car, and then I sat in their driveway for 10 minutes just breathing. 63 years old, and I was going to be a grandfather. My daughter was going to have a child. Her mother would have lost her mind with joy. I should have paid closer attention to how quiet Beau was that evening. He was not happy about the pregnancy. I understand that now. What I didn't understand then was how unhappy, and why, and what he intended to do about it. See, there was a trust. Royce Whitfield had structured the family's wealth through a private trust with a clause in it. Old money behavior, the kind of thing they do to maintain control across generations. Beau was entitled to the bulk of his inheritance upon turning 45, which was 4 years away, as long as his marriage remained intact and as long as he had no children before that date. The no children clause. I still don't entirely understand the reasoning behind it. Something about estate dilution. Something about maintaining a clean line of succession before the main inheritance transferred. But the point is, My daughter's pregnancy put a significant amount of money at risk for Beau and his father. We're talking about $8 or $9 million. I didn't know any of this. My daughter didn't know any of this. She had never seen the trust documents. Beau had never told her. Why would he? Why would you tell your wife that her having your child could cost you your inheritance, unless you planned to do something about it? He started pressuring her almost immediately. He was subtle at first. Offhand comments about timing, about how it might be better to wait, about whether she'd really thought through what a baby would mean for her consulting business. She told me about some of these conversations on our Sunday calls, framing them as just Beau being anxious, Beau needing time to adjust. I believed her framing because I wanted to, because the alternative was something I wasn't ready to look at directly. By the time she was 4 months along, he had stopped being subtle. She called me on a Tuesday night, and I could tell immediately from the sound of her voice that something was wrong. She said they'd had an argument. She said he had told her, plainly, that he wanted her to terminate the pregnancy. She said she'd told him no, that this was not something she was willing to do, and that he had looked at her in a way she'd never seen before, like she was an obstacle rather than a person, and he'd walked out of the room and slept in the guest room and hadn't spoken to her in 2 days. I asked if she needed me to come over. She said she was fine. She said she could handle it. I should have gone over anyway. What happened over the following 3 weeks, I've had to piece together partly from what my daughter told me, and partly from what came out later. Beau began consulting with a lawyer, not a family lawyer, a different one his father had apparently been using for years for matters that needed to stay quiet. The strategy they developed was not about divorce, at least not initially. It was about leverage. It was about making my daughter's life small and frightening enough that she would make the choice they wanted her to make. They started with her business. 2 of her major consulting clients, companies she'd worked with for years, suddenly terminated their contracts within the same week. No explanation given. She found out later that Beau Whitfield sat on the board of one of those companies and had a close personal relationship with the owner of the other. Then there was the issue with their joint bank account, which Beau restructured without telling her, moving the bulk of their savings into an account she didn't have access to. When she tried to use her debit card to pay for groceries, it declined. She called me, and I drove to an ATM and took out $300 and drove it to her house, and she cried the whole time and kept saying she didn't understand what was happening. I sat with her for 2 hours. I told her I was going to call a lawyer first thing in the morning. She asked me not to. She said she still thought she could fix it, that Beau would come around, that the man she married was still in there somewhere. I drove home that night feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not anger exactly, something colder than anger, something that sits in your chest and doesn't move. The baby shower was my idea. I thought visibility might help. Surround her with people. Make this pregnancy real and public and joyful. Give Beau and his father less room to operate in the dark. Her college friends organized it. My neighbor Faye brought flowers. I baked a lemon cake because it was her favorite since she was 7 years old, and I needed to do something useful with my hands. 40 people in the community room at her friend's apartment complex. Balloons, little sandwiches, a card table covered in wrapped gifts. My daughter looked beautiful and tired and genuinely happy for the first time in weeks. Beau showed up 45 minutes in. I hadn't expected him. Nobody had, I think, except maybe 1 or 2 of his friends who were watching from near the door. He walked in and he was calm. That was the thing that should have told me something. How calm he was. And he walked over to my daughter, and he said something to her quietly, and then he stepped back and 2 police officers came in behind him. The charge was financial fraud, specifically a claim that she had forged his signature on a document transferring funds from a business account. The account in question was one she hadn't even known existed. The document was fabricated. All of it was fabricated, but I didn't know that yet. Standing there with my plate of lemon cake, watching my pregnant daughter put her hands behind her back. She looked at me across the room. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. I set the plate down on the nearest table very carefully, and I walked outside, and I called my brother Lloyd. Lloyd is 68. He is 4 years older than me, and he has been the steadiest person in my life since the day I was born. He was a detective with the Cincinnati Police Department for 22 years before he retired. After retirement, he did private investigative work for a few years, then transitioned into consulting. Specifically, he works with attorneys doing pre-litigation investigation, asset discovery, witness location. He knows people in law enforcement across 3 states. He knows prosecutors, defense attorneys, federal investigators. He knows how money moves and how people hide it, and how to find the paper trail that somebody thought they'd buried. When I told Lloyd what was happening, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Get her the best criminal defense attorney in Cincinnati tonight. I'll handle everything else." He meant it. The criminal charge didn't survive the week. Lloyd had already located the original document Beau had claimed was forged, the real one, unsigned, sitting in a file at the business attorney's office. He'd also found a paralegal who'd been asked to notarize something she hadn't actually witnessed, and who, when contacted by Lloyd, was willing to talk. The prosecutor's office dropped the charge on Thursday morning. My daughter came home, but Lloyd wasn't finished. While I was focused on the criminal situation, Lloyd had been pulling on other threads. The first thing he found was the trust document, the actual language of it, obtained through a contact he had who did estate litigation. The no children clause was real, and more importantly, the correspondence between Beau and his father's attorney was real. Emails. Specific, detailed emails discussing the pregnancy as a financial liability and outlining strategies to resolve the situation. Lloyd had copies of all of it. The second thing he found was Royce Whitfield's business history. The medical supply company had been under informal scrutiny from a regional inspector general's office for about 18 months over questions related to Medicare billing practices, inflated costs on equipment supplied to skilled nursing facilities, the kind of scheme that's been running in the medical supply industry for decades, and that occasionally, when someone looks closely enough, turns into a federal case. Royce had managed to keep it quiet. He had relationships with the right people, but Lloyd's network extended in directions that Royce's relationships didn't cover. And Lloyd had a conversation with an investigator at the HHS Office of Inspector General, who had been waiting for a reason to look harder at Royce Whitfield's books. They had a reason now. I want to be honest about this part. I didn't ask Lloyd to do any of that. I didn't direct him toward the billing investigation. He found it on his own because when Lloyd pulls a thread, he follows it wherever it goes, and this one went somewhere significant. What I asked him to do was protect my daughter. What he did was protect my daughter and then keep pulling. The divorce attorney my daughter retained, one of the best family law practices in the city, filed for emergency protective relief within days of the dropped criminal charge. Beau's fabricated fraud claim became part of the divorce record. The emails about the trust were entered into discovery. The attorney pushed for and received an emergency court order freezing the joint marital assets, which meant the money Beau had moved suddenly had nowhere else to go. Beau hired lawyers, good ones. Royce hired lawyers, even better ones. They countered, and they maneuvered, and they did what people with significant resources do when they're cornered. They made the process as expensive and exhausting as possible, hoping the other side would run out of money or will. They miscalculated on both counts. Lloyd had connected my daughter's attorney with 2 additional clients from the medical supply company's billing history. Families of nursing home residents who had been overcharged for equipment and who had their own grievances, their own documentation. A civil attorney in Columbus started building a separate case. By the time the federal inquiry into Royce's Medicare billing practices became official, and it became official 7 months into the divorce proceeding, Royce Whitfield was no longer in a position to be financing his son's legal strategy. He had his own problems. Very expensive, very serious problems. Beau settled. I'm not going to go through the full terms, because some of it is confidential, and my daughter asked me to respect that. What I will say is that she received the house in Hyde Park, which she sold, and used to buy a smaller place outright in a neighborhood she loves. She received a financial settlement that will not make her wealthy, but will mean she is secure, for herself and for the baby, for a long time. The fabricated criminal charge is part of the official record of the divorce. Beau's attorney pushed to have it sealed, and the judge declined. Royce Whitfield's company entered into a settlement agreement with the federal government, 8 months after the divorce was finalized. The amount was not made public, but the Inspector General's press release described it as substantial. His board positions are gone. The Whitfield name, in certain circles in this city, means something different now than it did 3 years ago. My daughter had her baby on a Tuesday morning in March, a girl. 7 pounds, 2 ounces. She has her grandmother's eyes. I'm convinced of this even though everyone says newborns all look the same. I was in the waiting room with Faye and Lloyd when the nurse came out, and Lloyd, my 68-year-old retired detective brother, who I have never once in my life seen lose his composure, stood up and his eyes were wet and he said, "Well?" And I said, 7 pounds 2, everybody's fine. And he sat back down and looked at the ceiling for a long moment. I visit every Tuesday and Thursday. I fix things around the house. There's always something, a loose hinge, a light switch that's been acting up, a faucet that runs a little long after you turn it off. My daughter makes coffee and we sit at her kitchen table while the baby sleeps. And sometimes we talk and sometimes we just sit there. And it feels more like home than anywhere I've been in years. I think about Beau sometimes. Not with anger, exactly. More with a kind of tired clarity. He looked at my daughter and he saw a problem to be managed. He looked at his own child, his own unborn child, and he saw a financial liability. He had every advantage a person can have in this country. Money, family, connections, education, a father who would apparently do anything to protect him. And he used all of it to try to destroy a pregnant woman over a trust fund clause. He underestimated her. He underestimated me. He never even considered Lloyd. That's the thing about people who've had power their whole lives. They start to believe the power is theirs, that it belongs to them personally, that it's a reflection of who they are, rather than just a set of circumstances they were born into. They stop being able to imagine that someone they've dismissed could have resources they can't see. Royce Whitfield looked at me at that engagement party in Indian Hill, and he saw a retired electrician from the East Side, and he filed me away accordingly, and he never updated that file. He should have updated that file. My granddaughter's name is June. My daughter chose it because it was her mother's middle name, and because June is when things grow. I was there the first morning she smiled, a real smile, not the reflex kind, and I was holding her and she looked up at me and something happened in my chest that I don't have the right words for. 63 years of living, 31 of them as an electrician, 22 of them raising a daughter alone, and I had never felt anything quite like that. Some things you don't see coming. The good ones and the bad ones. The difference is what you do when they arrive.